we are going to talk about complex numbers. So, last week I told you guys that in the world of numbers, there are two types, and one was real and one was complex. And I said you don't have to worry about that, but now, you guys, now we have to learn about complex numbers. So, what a complex number is let's say we can take the square root of 4 and we get the answer of 2, correct? Can you take the square root of a negative number? No, okay? Well, now you are going to be able to. It's just called an imaginary number, okay? Why do we have imaginary numbers? The reason is because you use them more actually in real life than you do you use complex numbers more in real life. So, that's the reason why we have them. You use them more, okay? In general, if you have the square root of 1, it just equals 1. Now, when you have the square root of negative 1, we call that I. Okay? I standing for imaginary. So, I is equal to the square root of negative 1. I squared would equal square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1. What happens when we multiply two square roots? What happens to the square root? It goes away, so we get negative 1. I cubed Are we ready to go?
Ready.
Thank you. I cubed is the same thing as I squared times I to the first, because you'd add the two exponents together, that would give you I cubed. What was I squared? We just figured out. I squared is negative 1. So, negative 1 times I gives you negative I. And I to the fourth is the same as I squared times I squared. I squared is the same as what? So this is negative 1 times negative 1. This gives us positive 1. Then thing starts to repeat itself. So let's say we had I to the fifth. That's the same as I times I to the fourth, right? That's I times 1, which gives me I. So if they ever ask you for anything that's greater than 4, the easiest way to do this is say, okay, let's say they ask you I to the 37. Okay, well you take 37 and you divide it by 4 because it starts repeating after 4, and you get the remainder. So 4 goes into 37 8 times with the 9 times, right?
Sure.
With a remainder of what?
1.
With a remainder of 1. So I to the 37 is the same thing as I to the first, which we just call I. What did we do? We took the remainder and we put it as the exponent, because it would repeat itself 8 times, and then there would be 1 left over, so we'd end up at the top. So let's say we had I to the 42nd. Okay? I to the 42nd, well, 4 goes into 42 how many times? 10 times with the remainder of 2. So this would be the same as I squared, because it would go through this pattern 10 times, and then it would come back up here, and it would go 1, 2, and I squared is the same as what? Negative 1. So I to the 42nd is the same as negative 1.